Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Jenny Halpin, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Warrant Officer David Harding. As part of the memorial's commemorations to mark the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, this evening we remember the sinking of the Rakuyo Maru and the Kachidoki Maru. 81 years ago, on the 12th of September 1944, two Japanese ships transporting the prisoners of war from Singapore to Japan were sunk, resulting in the loss of over 1,500 Australian and British lives. The Japanese transported prisoners of war great distances across the empire, and today's stories of those who worked on the Burma-Thailand Railway and who died during their Sandakan death marches are well known. But the most dangerous period in a prisoner's life was travelling in captivity. Conditions on board ships were severe. Over 1,000 prisoners might be crammed into spaces suitable for a few hundred and given little food, fresh water, or adequate sanitation facilities. Some journeys lasted just a few days, but the longest was a voyage from Singapore to Japan, which took 70 days. The prisoners of war called these transports hell ships. The Rakuyo Maru, with 1,318 Australian and British prisoners of war aboard, and the Kachidoki Maru, carrying 900 British prisoners of war, were part of a convoy that left Singapore for Japan on the 6th of September 1944. The prisoners were survivors of the Burma-Thailand Railway who had recently returned to Singapore. On the morning of the 12th of September 1944, the convoy was attacked by American submarines in the South China Sea. Rakuyo Maru was sunk by USS Sea Lion II and Kachidoki Maru by USS Pampanito. Prisoners able to evacuate the ships spent the following days in life rafts or clinging to wreckage in open water. About 150 Australian and British survivors were rescued by American submarines. A further 500 were picked up by Japanese destroyers and continued the journey to Japan. Those not rescued perished at sea. Over 1,500 prisoners of war were killed in the incident. Some 22,000 Allied prisoners of the Japanese died in hellship disasters, 19,000 of them as a result of friendly fire incidents. More Allied prisoners of war were lost on the hellships than died on the Burma-Thai Railway. In the largest of these disasters, 6,520 prisoners, mostly Indonesian labourers, were killed when the Janyo Maru was sunk on the 18th of September 1944. Today, we remember those who died following the sinking of the Rakuyo Maru and the Kachidoki Maru. We pay our respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour and to the survivors who returned home. This evening, we warmly welcome the family of Gunner Milton John Farrell, whose story will be told shortly. We also warmly welcome Mr. Bob Goff, Vice President of the 2nd 15th Field Regiment and Vice President of the 2nd 30th Battalion AIF Associations, and Mr. Graham Wilson, Archivist of the 2nd 30th Battalion AIF Association, and representatives from one recruit training unit from the Royal Australian Air Force Base in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. Now, if you are able, could I please invite you to stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. With golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is got by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Those who require a seat, you may now be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Gunner Milton John Farrell. Milton Farrell was born in Manila, New South Wales on the 9th of December 1919, the son of Timothy and Daisy May Farrell. Milton's father was a veteran of the First World War, having served in Egypt and France with the 1st Field Artillery Brigade and returned to Australia after the war. Milton grew up alongside his brother William and sister Doris and went on to work as a clerk for the Department of Taxation. With the coming of the Second World War, Milton Farrell enlisted for service in the Australian Imperial Force on the 17th of June 1941. By then, he had already served part-time as a Lance Sergeant in the militia, parading with the 1st Cavalry Division Signals. The day after enlisting at Sydney, Farrell was marched out to join the 2nd 15th Field Regiment Artillery at Holsworthy and began training. He embarked from Sydney with his new comrades on the 29th of July 1941, just over a month after enlisting. Travelling to Singapore via Fremantle, he suffered mightily from seasickness. Arriving in mid-August, Farrell and the 2nd 15th went into camp at Nee Soon. The men trained and were able to familiarise themselves with the jungle. Throughout November and early December, war with Japan seemed increasingly likely. On the 15th of December, the 2nd 15th began moving from Singapore to the state of Johor. By early January, the Japanese had advanced through Thailand and most of Malaya. On the 5th of January, the 2nd 15th moved north to reinforce Allied troops opposing the main Japanese force. The regiment's batteries were dispersed to support the 27th Brigade, which was to act as a shock absorber to first contact with the Japanese, inflicting as many casualties as possible before falling back to defensive positions. Heavy fighting followed, and the regiment's gunners were in almost constant action, providing artillery support for the infantry withdrawal along the Malayan Peninsula towards Singapore. By the end of the month, the last Allied troops had crossed the causeway to Singapore Island. The causeway was blown, and the regiment was deployed to the western area in support of the 22nd Brigade. The Japanese attack on Singapore began on the 8th of February, when 2 Japanese divisions crossed the Johor Strait. The 2nd 15th inflicted heavy casualties on the attackers until, heavily outnumbered, with communications cut and the Japanese infiltrating between positions, the men were forced to withdraw. By the 13th of February, the battle for Singapore was all but over. 2 days later, British forces surrendered. Initially imprisoned in the sprawling Changi prisoner of war camp, it was not long before the men were allocated to external work parties. The first groups were sent around Singapore and southern Malaya. Farrell became part of A Force, the first Australian group to leave Singapore for Burma on the 14th of May 1942. After constructing airfields, A Force moved to Thanbai Azat, where it began working on the Burma-Thailand Railway. In all, 479 Australian soldiers died on the Burma section of the railway. Following its completion in October 1943, A Force returned to Singapore. While the horrors of the Burma-Thailand Railway are well known, the worst and most dangerous period in a prisoner's life was travelling in captivity. As well as overcrowding, sickness and disease, the dangers posed by Allied submarines caused much stress and anxiety. Conditions on board the hell ships were severe. More than 1,000 prisoners might be crammed into spaces suitable for a few hundred and given little food, fresh water or sanitation facilities. Rakuyo Maru, with 1,318 Australian and British prisoners of war aboard, and Kachidoki Maru, carrying 900 British prisoners of war, were part of a convoy carrying prisoners and raw materials that left Singapore for Japan on the 6th of September 1944. The prisoners had only recently returned to Singapore, having survived the infamous Burma-Thailand Railway. On the morning of the 12th of September 1944, the convoy was attacked by American submarines in the South China Sea. Rakuyo Maru was sunk by USS Sea Line 2, and Kachidoki Maru was sunk by USS Pampanito. Prisoners who were able to evacuate the ships spent days in life rafts or clinging to wreckage in open water. About 150 Australian and British survivors were rescued by American submarines. A further 500 were picked up by Japanese destroyers and continued their journey to Japan. Those who were not rescued perished in the sea. More than 1,500 prisoners of war, including 543 Australians, were killed in the incident, all missing at sea. Among the dead was Gunner Milton John Farrell, who was 24 years old. The survivors rescued by the American submarines were returned to Australia. They provided some of the earliest eyewitness accounts of the Burma-Thailand Railway. Today, with no grave but the sea, Milton Farrell is commemorated on the Labuan Memorial in Malaysia. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour to my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. A photograph of his name listed on the Labuan Memorial is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Gunner Milton John Farrell, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of our director, staff, and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.